Abusia for your mamunya wakwa about the kingdom of Asante so said ya munimu yandada na eba no amamre abakosem ene amane a wunya no baabi a just the kingdom of Asante dwumadi a yato ne din Asante chinchina no ene yaba bepiem e wo ye kwa menkom asu apon kesie no mu bia ya yefra ho the great hall e ho ena ene ye gina na ye ba ya ye nyina ye nim se afiwe ene emfie pole wa ha aduonum a English abrofo ebeto hye asanteman so etete asanteman pasa a na enye asemketo abra na English abrofo ebe enye wonom ko ena wo ba ye okofa Nigeria fo akofo de kan wonom ho sanso na omokofa ye like omokofa ye Nigeria akofo nso eka wonom ho omuwie anso ha omosa akọ Jamaica efa Jamaica akofo eka wonom ho esanso de omo ebaaye abra wo beduru oman Ghana mu no enya asemketo osanso ekoye mpoano aman onuma na ote eye mpoano mekire emfantefo akuapem ene achem okofa wonum ede ka wonum ho na enya asemketo beto hye asanteman so sabre no na edi oyenne kese ebo asanteman omutwa eja ede tu kumase ehyi kumase ananya asemketo ema manhia so omutwa eja ede to ho ema ene emrante etoto ewo akono na enye asemketo sabre no de na ni behwe oyenne kese ebo asanteman ema omohye asanteman na enya asemketo saa okun yi eye okun asanteman edi ngukuo asanteman ewre emfrida omofa asanteman numum ekunkum ahemfo akese ne emu akuma etitiriwu ne emintim etotoye na enya asemketo wie esanso efa ye nananom numum ede won ekoye omuwie no anso ha omosanso sesa egudie ene mpempra ne yem sika kokko ene niema na esombo ede ma nananom na nananom ede boa asanteman no omosesa ne nyina ede koye saa abakosemi yi ena ene nanom atworo ho enwoma ye de na di ewo eye kwa menkom asu apon kesi mu eha na okufo anase osagefo na odi saa okun no anim ema English abrofo no na ne din ede Sagrenti ono ana mo fa na Sagrenti na edi no enye Sagrenti eye Sagrenti Wesley ono ne din eno na ya nhunu ka se guarantee no na ya nhunu ka ye be frɛ no Sagrenti a ene yato okon ne din Sagrenti War eti ene ye ba na ye ba beda book no adi anase ye ba beda enwoma na nananom akrukyire agu nkrata mu no ye ba beda saa enwoma na di enwoma yi nananom ede na di akyerɛ abakosem trodo efi bia enim esanse saa abakosem yi ebia na wonnim a wobɛka na wanka ne yie eti nananom akrukyire saa eye abakosem yi agu enwomam ene ye da no adi eti men ha wadwe na mense orenti ye nyina yenkɔ na yenkɔ hwese ne adwumadie no ebese akɔ no dwumadie ne pompon so na hyase de kɔpem na wieye no ne nyina no ye betwa ho mfonyini ede akyerɛw yedin yede wo social media no ye wo social media platforms ni nyina so uko Facebook the Kingdom of Asante ye wo Facebook no so aya follow yen wo Facebook no so daroma wo ba aya menye peseminkum nya aya share na wunua so nya binhwe na omfa ensua de aya like page no efa emaye na fa waje nkyere eto comment section ase efa maye uko YouTube edin yede wo YouTube no the Kingdom of Asante official TV the Kingdom of Asante official TV YouTube wadaroma aya menhwe mfonyine ne keke aya subscribe efamaye said ebe ya yidi mfonyini bia tumu a wo na wo bedi nkan enya mfonyini no na wo ahwe aya like na efa wadwenkyere to comment section no ase emaye midin ede nana danso ye nyina yenko na yenko tie na yenko hwe se ne adwumadie no ebese akọ
Almighty and ever-living God, indeed it is in you we live, move, and have our being. And therefore it is meet and right that as we have gathered here, we acknowledge you and give you all the glory and the praise for your goodness and your mercies towards us as individuals, for your goodness and your mercies towards us as a nation, for your goodness and your mercies towards us as Asante man. And we give you all the glory for this gathering, an all-important one, which seeks to bring glory and honor to your name. At this time, I want to thank you, O God, for all that you have done for us, especially in this commemorative occasion. I want to thank you for what you have done for Asante man. I want to thank you for all the leaders you have given to this great nation over the past years that the nation of Asante man came into existence. We bless your name for our current leader of Asante man, Otumfuo Osei-Tutu II. We give you all the glory, O God, for the history, the very rich history you've given to Asante man, even as we've gathered here today to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Sagrenti War, which also coincides with the silver jubilee of Otumfuo Osei-Tutu. We commit this symposium and the book launching that we're going to have today before you, committing all facilitators of this great program before you, that your spirit will guide, lead, and direct us, so that this reflective moment will guide us even into the future, a future of hope and prosperity and progress, not only for Asante man, but for our nation as a whole. We praise and bless you for answering our prayer, because you have asked for this and many more blessings through Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Please bless it.
son of Yaoba, Akwaba. We meet here today on this great day in history for a symposium on the 150th anniversary of the Sagrenti War and the launch of the book, History of the Ashanti, by Otumfuo Sir Ashman II, as the first in the series of many events marking the silver jubilee of Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, the 16th Asante and the current occupant of the Golden Stool. Today, we take pride in welcoming sons and daughters who have come from far and near to add their weight to this glorious celebration. Allow me the privilege of acknowledging, especially amongst us, our guest of honor, a son of Asanteman, MP for Kusumche, and the Honorable Minister for Education, the Honorable Dr. Yao Osei Tutu. MP for Tano North, the Minister for Sanitation and Water Resources, the Honorable Frida Prempeh. The Regional Minister joins us in solidarity, the Honorable Simon Osei Mensah. Immediate past Chief Justice of the Republic of Ghana, His Lordship Justice Kwesi Amin. It is with profound joy that we welcome our keynote speaker, now a son of Asanteman, the Professor Tom McCaskey. He joins us with his lovely wife, Mrs. Lynn Bryden McCaskey. Thank you very much. It will be lost on me not to acknowledge Excellencies, members of the diplomatic community, our MPs, MCs, and DCs, Nananum, and esteemed chiefs and queens from Asanteman and beyond, our religious leaders, the moderators and panelists for this morning's symposium, the Vice Chancellor of the KNUST, Professor Mrs. Rita Akusia Dixon, the Pro-Vice Chancellor, distinguished faculty and staff of the KNUST, and other distinguished members of academia who have come from far and near, captains of industry, heads, teachers, students and pupils of selected schools, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, we say receive the warm and generous hospitality of Asanteman.
Otumfuo Osei Tutu Asante, Honorable Ministers of State, Honorable Immediate Past Chief Justice, Regional Minister, Nananum, Vice Chancellor of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, my alma mater, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my duty is to welcome you, and since in a traditional setting, saying welcome means Akwaba, I thought that my duty would be done if I just uttered the word Akwaba, and I would then resume my seat. But when the two boys are around, you cannot be very brief. You have to go to town and say a few more things. So I'll say a few more things. And if there are a few, just pardon me that there are a few. I speak on behalf of the Otumfuo Osei Tutu II Jubilee Planning Committee. This committee has been put together to celebrate the 20 meritorious, momentous years of Otumfuo's ascension to the Golden Stool. By a very happy coincidence, this year, the Silver Jubilee year, also coincides with two seminal events in the annals of Ashanti history. These are the 150 years of the Sagrenti War, the Sagrenti War as we call it in P, the corruption of the word Sagrenti War, and also the 100 years of the repatriation of King Nana Prophet I from Seychelles after 28 years of exile. Now, this function is the first of a series of activities to mark the celebrations, to commemorate the activities as I've enumerated. Taking them in chronological order, the 6th of February was exactly, today was exactly 150 years ago when British forces under Sagrenti War invaded Kumasi, looted the palace of precious regalia, and completely burnt Kumasi down, and left the town smoldering after their invasion. This morning, we have assembled an array of eminent people who are knowledgeable in the Ashanti history and customs to regale us with the causes of the war, the cause of the war, and Asante after the war. It is instructive to add that since Otumfuo's exhulement some 25 years ago, the issue of the return of the regalia that was looted by the British has engaged his highest attention, and he has never relented in pursuing this mission and has been knocking the doors of the British establishment with a view to getting them to return the regalia. By a happy coincidence, the British finally have answered our prayers, albeit in some veiled way, that half a loaf, they say, is better than none. However, some of the regalia which were taken to the US are here and going to be here until time and circumstances shall be no more. So, as I said, the jewel in the crown of the celebration will be, first and foremost, the return of the regalia from the US, from America, which will be handed over to Otumfuo the day after tomorrow, on Thursday, at the Kutukudi Deba. And then the return of the regalia at the British Museum and at the British Victoria and Albert Museum on the Akweside Deba, which is slated for the 12th of May. We hope that even if it's a loan, it will be a permanent loan to us. As I said earlier, we have two functions this morning. One is a symposium, and the other is the launching of the book on the history of Asante. As you all know, before the written word was introduced into our educational system or in our culture, the mode of transmitting our history, our values, our culture, and our morals and other things was through the spoken word. In the evening, the old men would assemble the young ones and then tell them about the wars of old, our customs, our traditions, their games, and other things. So it was compulsory for children to attend to these calls. Hence, we call the word Tite Ka Asum. It has been corrupted to Tite Ka Asum, but it means Tite Ka Asum, that is the past precise in the years. However, with the introduction of the written word and calligraphy, the year became less receptive to Tite, and therefore new modes had to be introduced to maintain and retain our history and to transmit it from one generation to the other. We were fortunate to have Otum Force at my Prempe, the second Asante Hene, the first formally educated Asante Hene to ascend the stool in 1931, and through the date of his hard work, was able to restore the Confederacy, which had been disbanded in 1896, in 1935. Immediately upon ascending the stool, he felt that our molds needed to change. So, perhaps our children were going to school, and for that matter, they were not getting the tuition that they deserved and they had to have. He assembled other eminent people, the Asafoides, the Ike, See Yourselves, the Ike Adimans, and others, to give our history the benefits of being put down in writing, so as to remove the inconsistencies and the contradictions that attend to transmitting history orally. This was indeed a formidable task which lasted several years. And it is a happy coincidence that he had Professor Tom Maskaski, an eminent son of Asante, who though has he's been with Ashanti for over 50 years, since he came to Ashanti in 1968. Virtually a year passes without his coming down to us and writing about Asante and all our histories and everything. And Professor Maskaski has accepted to edit this book. And this is a veritable history of Asante from our own perspectives, without any biases, without any contradictions, and without any enlargements or any diminutions. And the second aspect of the program would be to auction the book. And I'm sure that you have come down with your deep pockets and with your fact check books so as to give the auction the necessary support that it deserves. I'm sure that those of you who buy at the highest price will have autographed copies by Tumfo himself. So as I said earlier, I welcome you. I think I've said a few things, and if my view is not enough, I think I'll take leave and then give the floor to our eminent MC to continue the program. Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the proceedings. Thank you very much.
These wise and warm words of welcome have set the tone for a long day of reflections, learnings, and insights. Please help me appreciate once again the job beginning, the chair of the Council of State and the chair of the Silver Jubilee Planning Committee, Nana Otuosrebo II. It has fallen to a Wache Ajima Bonsu.
Thank you very much, MC. Your Royal Majesty, Tumfo to the second, Asante Kingdom. And now to Silbo the second, the chairman of the Tumfo Silver Jubilee Committee. Honorable Minister for Education, Dr. Oseya Odichum. Honorable Minister for Energy, Matthew Buku Prembe. Nanano Mamaini, Nanano distinguished speakers, VC, the press, ladies and gentlemen, I will accept all protocol. It is normal for such an auspicious occasion to have someone who can ably steer the affairs for the day. It therefore gives me a great pleasure to introduce the chairman of the occasion. Our chairman for this August function is a native of Kumasi. He entered the University of Ghana in 1976 to read law and was called to the bar as a barrister in 1981. He worked at the Attorney General's office for his national service. He was a private legal practitioner and was the president of the Eastern Region Bar Association. He was appointed as a High Court judge in 2002, and because of his hard work, he was promoted to the Court of Appeal just a year after that. In 2008, he was appointed as a Supreme Court judge. He held several positions in the judicial service and other judicial bodies. He was the chairman of the Legal Aid Commission, the chairman of the Council for Law Reporting, the chairman of the Disciplinary Committee of the General Legal Council, and in 2002, he was appointed as the Chief Justice of Ghana. He retired in May 2023, after 21 years of distinguished career on the bench. Aside being an accomplished legal professional, our chairman is also a football enthusiast. No wonder he was elected as the chairman of the FIFA Disciplinary Committee and also became the first African to be elected to occupy one of the FIFA judicial bodies. He is married with 4 children. Please join me with a big applause to welcome our chairman for the occasion in the person of the former Chief Justice, Enim Yeboah.
Your Royal Majesty, the Otunfo Asante Kingdom, the Honorable Regional Minister, the Honorable Members, the Honorable Ministers of State, the Vice Chancellor, Nanano, Mahine, Abrimpong, the linguist, the Vice Chancellor and the Pro-Vice Chancellor, the members of the academia, herein present, eminent members who are all here as university community. I am indeed honored to be the chairman of this all-important occasion. This is an occasion which marks the 150th anniversary of the Sagrenti War. Some of us just decided to learn history in passing. Unfortunately, we didn't know the inner details of the war, what caused it, and the cause of the war, and as the chairman of the occasion said, the end result for this, our great kingdom. We are here today to take stock of what happened about 150 years ago. If we look at the brochure, we have assembled eminent speakers who have amassed enough knowledge to share with us. History, they say, must be accurate, free from all distortions. It may be told that in narrating history, there are bitter ones which should not be ignored. There are sweeter ones which we should all swallow. At times we have to swallow a bitter pill just to cure ourselves. So, my Lord, Nanano, distinguished elders of the Asante Mind, I am here to humbly accept the invitation to be the chairman of this great occasion, and I'm grateful to Otunfo Asante and the chairman of the planning committee for giving me this honor, this great and memorable occasion. So I am here to serve you, and I think you all cooperate and have a fruitful discussion as the history starts to unfold for our consumption. I am grateful, and I think it's completed. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
His Lordship Justice Wesi Endinyepua is our chairperson for this august occasion. Please, a round of applause. We thank you for accepting to chair, who is the chair of the Otumfuo Foundation. Make welcome Nana Professor Ohiniba Kwachi Eji Wadene II.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. Your Royal Majesty, Otumfuo Osei II, Asante Kingdom, Nana Ojo Sribo II, Chairman of the Jubilee Planning Committee, Mr. Chairman, Chief Justice Endinyepua, Honorable Minister of Education, Osei Ejichu, Minister of Energy, Honorable Matthew Poku Prempe, Dr. Regional Minister of Ashanti, Vice Chancellor of KNUST, and unknown distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Allow me a few minutes to introduce our keynote speaker for this landmark symposium on the Sagrenti War. We have with us today no other person than the illustrious and prolific historian, Professor Thomas C. McCaskey, also known as Kwaku McCaskey. He was trying to get close to Kwaku here, too for Kwaku here. Well, Professor McCaskey is a professor of Asante History, Center of West African Studies, Birmingham University, United Kingdom, and Professor of History of Africa, School of Oriental and African Studies, London University. He retired in 2011. He first worked in and on Asante in 1968 at a tender age of 22 and was the youngest faculty member in the history department of the University of Ghana. He spent the whole of his life working, researching, writing, and publishing on Asante. He has written 2 monographs on Asante, State and Society in Pre-Colonial Asante, and Asante Identities, History and Modernity in an African Village. He has also published over 80 papers on Asante, 50 of which have been republished in his Asante Kingdom of Gold, Essays in the History of African Culture. The history of Asante Kings and the whole country itself. Knowing the importance of research done by the committee that was convened by Otumfuo Osei Ajiman Prempe II, which started way back in 1939, he singularly edited the final volumes of the typescripts and manuscripts, which culminated in the final publication of this timeless piece we have with us today, History of Asante by Otumfuo Osei Ajiman Prempe II. His curriculum vitae is replete with anecdotes, and I had a few minutes with him. I asked him what was your best moments in Kumasi. He said when he served as the royal golf caddy for Otumfuo Prempe II. I believe that's where he got a lot of his notes too. Today, his keynote address is on the Sagrenti War and its aftermath and reflections. Please join me to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Kwaku McCaskey.
Nana Otumfuo, Nana Num, distinguished guests, and the public, I'm very honored indeed to make this short presentation about the Sagrenti War. I want to start very quickly with a view of the reign of Kwekadu Adam, who died in 1867. The reason I'm doing is simple. Kwekajua Adjumani was the most pernickety and stickler sort of man when it came to the law. He's known as Kwekwanasi, Kweka the Wise, he's known as Adjumani Bambo. He was somebody who really enforced the laws of Asante. In the process, he gathered together a great deal of money in gold dust, principally, but also in specie and other things. And I say all this because I want to underline and emphasize something that I think is being overlooked. When Nana Kwekajua Adjumani died in 1867, he left behind a very great deal of money. And I will give you some idea of this. The money was stored in 3 places. It was stored in the Adakakase, the great chest of the treasury. It was stored in the Asante country palace at Abaraso, and it was stored elsewhere at Breman. The sums involved, I've been able to calculate because we know the dimensions of the Adakakase, and with assistance from members of the British Mint, chemists, engineers, the kind of people who could know about the science of gold and the measurement of gold and all the rest of it. We have calculated that the amount of gold contained in the Adakakase alone at Kwekajua's death was in excess of 400,000 ounces. Now, the 100,000 ounces in 1867 were worth £1.2 million sterling. But you know what's happened to gold in our lifetime. The contemporary, current value of the Adakakase is somewhere over £2 billion. A lot of money. Now, he left this money to his successor, Kofi Kakari. And Kofi Kakari was a waster. He distributed money to buy popularity, and he was eventually destoled at the end of the Sagrenti War. I'll come to the war in a moment, but let me simply say that, to underline what I've already said, that the attempt to get back the treasures looted from Kumasi by Sir Garnet Wolseley in 1874 takes no account, because it cannot, of the gold in gold dust and unworked gold that the British must have carried away with them. We don't know about this. Of course we don't know, because it was loot, private loot, and so it is separate from the cultural artifacts that Nana Tufo is trying to retrieve for the Asante man and retrieve for the Republic of Ghana. Now, the war itself is often referred to generally as a colonial war, one of Britain's first colonial wars. But we can refine that a little. We can refine it, in fact, quite a lot. In the 1860s and 1870s, Britain came to realize that it did not have a first-class army. In fact, it was an army composed of people, a lot like in the 18th century, who had bought their commissions. And this had to change, and change it did, and the leader of this change was Sir Garnet Wolseley. Assisted by the War Secretary, Edward Cardwell, he modernized the army, and of course, this didn't mean just modernizing how it was run. It was modernized from the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. And I will name only a couple of things here. The British came to Asante in 1874 to make war, 1873 to make war, with telegraph communications, with people on board the ships who brought the officers to advise them on what Asante was like. In other words, intelligence gathering on a new and unusual scale. They also had with them, and perhaps most crucially, Snider rifles. These were the result of revolutionary developments in armaments. And unlike the flintlocks used by the Asante or the muskets used by the Asante, these were very accurate, long-range repeating rifles. The first, or at least one of the first, among modern rifles. So they came, and they came with all this in their baggage and their intentions. Now Wolseley himself was determined to rise to be head of the British Army, which he eventually did. And he brought with him to Asante a group of officers known as the Wolseley Ring, the Ring of Friends, who would rise with him. So there was a very personal motive in Wolseley fighting this war and being seen to have fought it and won it for himself, for Britain, for Queen Victoria and the rest. And we have proof of this. This was the first war in which the general in command, Wolseley, was accompanied by large numbers of the British press. This war was reported very extensively in England, with jubilation, of course, when Kumasi was taken. Now, the Asante themselves, Queen Victoria, for the 30 years of its reign, had maintained a hands-off policy towards any of the states south of the Pra and the Europeans. There were no real or significant Asante military ventures south of the Pra in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Kwiginu view of things was that Asante ruled inland itself and its northern dependencies, and the British ruled the whites on the coast. So it was a world vision that really contrasted the two worlds of Africa and Europe. He was the ruler of Africa, and they were the rulers of the south, led by the whites. But of course, this was nothing to do with what Wolseley wanted, or what the British government backed. And so, despite the fact that in 1873, the Asante withdrew those military forces he had on the borders of the Pra and southwards into almost Fanti, he withdrew them and tried to make peace with the British. Wolseley absolutely refused. There is no other word for it. He turned him down flat because Wolseley and the British government were determined to have their war. Now you can imagine the kind of propaganda that was put about by the British about Asante. A savage despotism, blood running in the streets, endless sacrifices, barbarians, racism in short, and very highly developed Victorian racism. So Wolseley crossed the Pra and went to Kumasi. Now, one of the things that's almost never noticed about the occupation is that he was only there for a couple of days. He was frightened that the Asante would counterattack. He was frightened that the army he led would come down with tropical diseases. And so, having secured his victory, he scurried back to the coast very, very quickly, stopping only at Flomina, where he sent to enforce a treaty he had drawn up with the Asante Kingdom. The treaty was a treaty of, and you may want to laugh at this point, the treaty was a treaty of permanent peace between Britain and Asante. And he asked that Kobe Kakari, as a sign of goodwill, hand over 50,000 ounces of gold to show his good faith. He never did that, but that's another story. Now, in the occupation of Kumasi, the place was, as previous speakers have said to you, the city was burned and comprehensively looted. The Aban, the big story building constructed by Asante Kingdom in 1819 to 22, the King's Own Palace, They were all ransacked by the British. Now, I told you the amount of gold that was floating about Asante at this time in dust. We have no account of it. Soldiers just filled their pockets or took it away in little wrappings and things like that. So we just do not know about that, but we do know about the cultural treasures. And I just want to mention two of them in passing, and they're simply this. In the Wellcome collection, the foundation in London, there is the largest gold mass known from sub-Saharan Africa. It is a portrait of the Bandahini Woroza, defeated and killed by the Asante Kingdom in the 1760s, and it weighs over 2 kilos. Its current value in gold alone, never mind its aesthetic value, its cultural value, its value of gold alone is over £80,000 sterling. The other piece of loot that I want to particularly emphasize is not taken in 1874. It was taken in 1896 when the British returned and arrested Asante Kingdom. Now, you would think this was nothing. Somebody must have just picked it up and taken it away. It was a brass basin called the Ayakasi, which was displayed before the Royal Mausoleum in Bantama and was part of the practices of recalling the ancestral monarchs of Asante. It is simply a brass basin, but the British took it away. When Prempeh came back in 1929, he wrote to the British and tried to get this battered brass basin restored. And the British wouldn't give it. And it is still in Britain at the United Services, the Army Museum in London. The war itself had a catastrophic effect on Asante. Catastrophic in the sense that, well, in a number of senses. Above all, it shattered unity. Asante works best when it's united under its king. The British seduced away and led away large numbers of defectors into the Gold Coast colony, and Asante descended into a period of anarchy. Now, you all know this anarchy was at its lowest point, was the civil war that occurred in Asante between 1883 and 1888. There is no doubt at all that the British encouraged resistance to diplomacy, whether by giving arms, which was illegal of course, and which they never talked about publicly, money, or just general support, and above all, refuge to those who opposed the Asante in the Gold Coast colony, which they had established in 1874 after the Sagrenti War. I haven't got much time left, so I will simply cover what is left of the story. In 1892, the British wrote to Asante Kingdom first, offering him British protection. That is, that Asante, which he was trying to restore to its former status after the Civil War, that Asante should come under formal British protection. Benjamin Prempeh simply refused. He said, no, we're an independent kingdom. Not only did he refuse, he sent an embassy to London to underline his point that Asante was an independent kingdom. The embassy spent some time in London, but the British government refused to see it. And while it refused to see it, it was planning a second invasion of Asante. And this occurred as the embassy returned to the coast and the British advanced on Kumasi again in 1896. There, Benjamin Prempeh was faced by one of the greatest challenges that any Asante has faced. Should he fight? Should he not? The solution he came up with is beyond admirable. He knew that after the Sagrenti War and after the civil wars, he knew perfectly well that if the British unleashed their military power now on what was a weakened Asante, people would suffer in enormous numbers. So instead of permitting this to happen, he decided to surrender himself and his mother and various other of his dignitaries of his family to the British, provided they prosecuted no military action in Asante. So he was taken away as a British captive, and the rest of the story you know. He remained on the coast until 1900, and then he was sent to Sierra Leone, and finally to the Seychelles and the Indian Ocean, from which he did not return until 1924. But the Asante themselves had had enough of this. In 1896, when they took Prempeh away, they established a system of direct military informal rule through collaboration with chiefs, people that they had appointed themselves to run the country for them. This only lasted for 4 years because the Asante themselves, ordinary people led by chiefs as well, fostered, created, and fought a military uprising against the British in 1900. This is commonly known as the Yasa because of the heroic behavior of the Chwesliba, the woman, the Asante. That war ended in the ruthless suppression of the Asante. This time, there was no offer of perpetual peace. There was no offer of friendship. There was simply the fact that Asante was made a British Crown colony in 1901, was given a British government to rule over it in the absence of an Asante, and in the aftermath of the war, large numbers of people convicted of treason against the British Crown by fighting for Asante in that war were jailed, hanged, or otherwise deported. Now, there's very little else I need to say, except that this is a shameful episode in British history, like most of British history. It is a shameful episode because it was based on industrial might and a racial ideology. The British were never a great continental military power. They did not have large land armies. What they did have and what they assumed was an overseas empire from which they could extract money through trade, preferential rates, and all the rest of it. And Asante was one of the earliest additions across the world to that particular empire. It's often forgotten, and this is my final remark here, it's often forgotten how short British colonialism was. When I came to Asante, age 22, out of Wahad in 1968, I met people who had lived all the way through the British period. They were born before the British came, and they were there when the British left in 1957. So it is time finally to put this episode in the past and to reassert Asante unity under the Asante and go forward into the future. And I encourage most strongly Asante man to pursue further the matter of the restoration of the treasures that were taken in 1874 and taken in 1896. Thank you very much.
Professor of History and of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, a proud fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a corresponding fellow of the Royal Historical Society, UK, Professor Emmanuel Achampo. Seated with him, make welcome an adjunct lecturer and gender historian affiliated to the Department of History and Political Studies at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology here in Kumasi, Professor Eugenia Anderson. In their distinguished company, from the Department of History and Political Studies at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology is Ghana's first trained social historian of medicine. Make welcome Professor Samuel. With joy, we receive the former research coordinator of the History and Politics section of the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, Professor Samuel Interusu. And last but certainly not the least, our brother, our father, Professor of Asante History at the Center of West African Studies, Birmingham University, UK, Professor Tom McCaskey. Prof, the moderator, you have an hour to deliberate.
His Royal Highness, Nana Otumfuo Abebu, Nana Joabekumi, Chair of our Silver Jubilee Planning Committee, Nanano, honorable ministers and parliamentarians, the Vice Chancellor, my academic colleagues, since I'm in the university, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to stand on all previous protocols which acknowledged our present dignitaries. As Jerry mentioned, my name is Emmanuel Kwekwe Champon. I'm a professor at Harvard. I will briefly give you the context and the format for the symposium, and then I'll sit down. So we are looking at the last quarter of a century. So from about 1874 through the Asante War of 1900-1901. Some of my colleagues may share reflections that might go a little forward than that. We have 4 speakers. So our first speaker will be Tom McCaskey to provide big picture. So we are looking at how the Amantne and the Amantuo fared in this last quarter of the 19th century. So a big view. And then Samuel Edujemfi will come after that and provide a perspective from Kumasi, a cosmopolitan city, a royal city, and the perspective on this last quarter of a century. Then we'll go to Professor Samuel Interusu, who will look at the missionary factor, both in Sagrenti, going through the annexation in 1896-1900. After all, it was the taking of the Ramsiers and Kune, Bonat, keeping them in Kumasi for 4 years, that incited the sentiments that would lead or feed into Sagrenti War. It is also important to note that as the 1896 expedition came, they were followed by missionaries. So it is not surprising that some of the earliest photographs we have of the submission of Prempeh and his mother are from the archives of the Basel missionaries, because they followed the invasion of 1896. Then we'll go to Eugenia Anderson, and I've been enjoying conversations with her these last few days. I've had the pleasure of being associated with 2 histories. by two Asante Kingdoms. The first one by Prempeh I, when he was in the Seychelles, and then the present one that we will launch by Prempeh II. In conversations with Eugenia, she challenged me to reflect on what a history of Asante could look like if dictated by an Asante woman, and what that female perspective of Asante could look like. And I think I will sit with that for some time to come. Each speaker will have 12 minutes for opening remarks, maximum 15 minutes. Because they are professors, they are welcome to come to the podium to share their opening reflections. I encourage them to look in my direction, so when I do this, you know you have 3 more minutes, and when I do this, you know you have to stop talking. And since Otufo is here, stop talking, you stop talking. After they finish, we will open up for Q&A, and I'll ask the audience to ask a question. Let it be a question or a very brief comment. We are creating something called Asantepedia, which will be a popular platform online for individuals and families to deposit stories they have from their families between about 1874 and Prempeh I's return in 1924. So if you have good stories, that's where it should be, so that as many people as possible can ask short questions. So that's the format, and I will now invite Tom McCaskey to start us off. So let us welcome Professor Tom.
Getting tired of looking at me, I think. But I'll be called back to talk a little about what happened to Asante after the Sagrenti War. After the Sagrenti War, Kofi Kakari was de-stooled because he had presided over it in humiliation of the family. The trouble was that his successor on the stool was his brother, Mensa Bonsi. Now, Mensa Bonsi was a man of avaricious, greedy, and vicious temperament, and is remembered as such today. He had a low, whispering voice, and if he could not hear you, or you could not hear him, he would find you or punish you. He was that sort of person. And in the conditions that followed the Sagrenti War, he was a tyrant, and he is remembered as such. He died on the Brassens in 1900, and his sons had him disinterred and reburied in Kumasi in 1911, and there was a huge outcry against this happening, but the British allowed it to take place. Well, going back to his reign, he thoroughly alienated almost everybody in Asante, and he began this by invading Juaben in 1875 to, in his view, bring it to heel. The Juaben had fled once before, but they fled this time south again to Koparejo at New Juaben, and they would not return. And this opened the floodgates. Without that unity and the Asante, he was respected, and he could impose his will and interpret custom properly. Without that, all kinds of conflicts broke out in Asante. Adansi against Bukwai, Mampong against Italy, etc., etc., etc. And these are covered enormously in Prempeh II's book, which you'll be very happy to hear. I'm not going to read to you. And he, excuse me, and so these conflicts spread through Asante. When I was introduced, it was mentioned that I had written a book on Kumasi village between 1850 and 1950. That village is now in Kumasi, it's Adibeba, which belonged to the Mandalay School. And in that book, I was able to cite testimonies of people who lived through the Civil War of 1883 to 1888 that were collected in the 1940s. And it was a period of intense deprivation. People starved to death. People were homeless. People were refugees. And meanwhile, the warlords, the Alahini, who had asserted themselves against symposium, descended into a civil war between themselves. The country was in ruins. Kumasi, in the end of the 1880s, was in a terrible condition. An Englishman on his way to Jaman in the Ivory Coast visited it in 1889 and said it was virtually in ruins. It was nothing like the way it was portrayed in the early 19th century by earlier English visitors. And so, Ajahn Prempeh came to the school in 1888 amidst these ruins. And he set about repairing the Asante Kingdom, bringing it back together as best he could. And he had some notable successes. An expedition to Incoranza in 1892 brought the Incoranza back into the fold of the Asante Kingdom's independence. But of course, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, Ajahn Prempeh could do nothing about the British. And so, while he was desperately trying to get the Asante Kingdom reunited under his authority, the British came, as I mentioned in my first address, the British came to take him away in 1896. Now, in Prempeh II's history, there is an account of the debate that he had with his chiefs about what he was going to do. And he said to them, if we fight, we will all be killed at Asante with the ruler. So I will sacrifice myself as the Asante and go as a prisoner with the British so that they will not fight here and they will not make the Civil War even worse. So Prempeh was taken away with his mother and his father, Jabini, off to jail in Elmina. And the Asante were not happy with it. They were very unhappy with it indeed, which is why, as I said, that war in 1991, the Yala Asante War. Now, it is very difficult to compress and to tell you in any detail, in fact I can't, nobody can, the events of that period between 1883, between 1875 and 1900 for President State. They are immensely complicated, but certain things need to be noted, even if only briefly. Firstly, Prempeh had some notable successes. As I said, in Nicaragua and with a number of areas around Kumasi. But he could not stem the tide of disaffection that had been caused by the sheer anarchy of the war and the brutality inflicted during it. Not only that, but now the British deliberately seduced dissident Asante who were against Prempeh to come south into the Gold Coast colony, as indeed the Juagan had done in 1875, and there they were given good protection and allowed to plot against the Asante and Prempeh. Now, these are a very significant group of people, and the reason is simple. They were the people that the British relied on as collaborators once they had occupied Kumasi again in 1900 and turned it into a crown colony in 1901. And these people were placed on stools, the senior stools, the Brempog stools and the Armenian stools, of those who had been deported, ultimately to the Seychelles and the French. Now there's a long and complex history here. Nobody will get it, I'm not going to go into it, but let me simply say this. The first 20 years of British rule are really about getting rid of these calamities. The Asante people themselves would not put up with these people. People like Kwame Wachi and Agoda or Kwame Tua of the Jazz Stool, or the British informant Kwesi Appiah Nwama Kwame Tua's brother, who was made Achi-Adehini by the British. They would not put up with this, and eventually, one way or another, all of these chiefs were removed. But after Premi came back in 1924, of course, the British did not in any way countenance him become ruler again. That had to wait until 1931, when he was reinstated not as a Asante, but as ruler of the Kumasi division, and nothing else. And it took 4 more years of petitioning, of trying to persuade the British to have the Confederacy restored. Now, I'm going to finish by talking about the Confederacy. The Confederacy that the British restored was restored under the precepts of British custom and British law. The principle was decentralization. They would not, for their own political reasons, accord the authority that Kumasi had enjoyed in the pre-colonial period, and they encouraged, if not secession, then forms of independent action by all these armies. And Premi II spent most of his long reign between 1931 and 1970, when he was not playing golf, when I was carrying his clothes. He spent most of his long reign trying to restore the oldest of them, the Asante's authority, the Asante's arbitration of custom, and these forms of traditional government back in Asante. And that struggle, I'm going to name no names, but that struggle, as you all know, everybody in this room knows, goes on to this day. I will merely mention, in conclusion, Kumasi. When I first came here in 1968, Kumasi had 100,000 people. Now it's got 4.25 million people. Where is the land? Well, we know that right now, as I speak, land is the biggest issue in Kumasi. And the Asante has to defend the Golden Stool's rights in the land in Kumasi, which were taken away by the British and then restored only in part in the 1940s. So, there are still battles to fight here, and I hope their battles will be won. Thank you very much.
His Royal Majesty, to four Asante Kingdom, was 82. None the Vice Chancellor of KNUST, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Ministers, and all here present, they understand an existing protocol to proceed. I shall try to sketch my thoughts around the 18th and the 19th century Asante politics. My interests fundamentally will be to focus on Kumasi. One of our sisters, Edwards, who is a PhD candidate from the diaspora, has done something very significant, and I shall use her point on the setting of Kumasi and the palace prior to 1874. The 19th century cosmopolitan city of the Asante in Kumasi was a well-built metropolis and economic center, covering 1 mile north to the south and 3/4 of a mile in width. The monumental Ahimfi, which is the palace of the Asante, was located on a hill in the city center, measuring 1,500,000 square feet and covering 34 acres. The east edge of the imperial residence was the sacred Supreme River. The Supreme River deities and Asantehenes
place where you worship Tridiapo, even to the immediate west, strategically positioned throughout the lush garden landscape of the Asante city, where elaborately Asante designed buildings and residences belonging to royal chiefs and courtiers to the king. The Asante city in the Edu area was not demarcated by walls like the typical imperial cities. The architecture of the noblemen's houses surrounding the residence, the dense forest, and the Subin River formed an invisible defense against invaders. European surveyors and religious and diplomatic visitors were in awe of the vast forest landscape and the symbolic, aesthetic, and technical beauty of the structures as they entered the city. However, the position of the Asante city and surrounding natural and architectural elements was more than what was visible. The imperial metropolis of the Asante was layered with spiritual, cultural, and security values to the nation. Indeed, Kumasi represented the traditional political capital of the forest state of Asante, as well as the residents of the Asante. The Oyoko royals, all important Kumasi office holders and functionaries, stayed there and performed services associated with the Kumasi court, and their conjugal families resided in Kumasi. Again, it is significant to note that Kumasi was also the cultural capital. In this capacity, the atmosphere of Kumasi was characterized by elegance or sophistication, as initially noted. In fact, in 1874, the British, led by Sir Kenneth Wolseley, defeated Asante and ransacked Kumasi. The election of Prempeh I as Asante, which began 10 years after the Sagrenti War, was marked by civil war and eventual deportation and exile with key Asante leaders in 1896, first to Sierra Leone and finally to the island of May in Seychelles. British attempts to break Asante and impose their hegemony on Asante did not end with Prempeh's exile. From 1900 to 1901, in the last Asante War of Independence against the British, Asante was defeated and placed under the control of the governor of the Gold Coast. The British then instituted measures and institutions that started the colonization of Kumasi, which they retained as the capital of Asante. May I, as a point of emphasis, say that when you look at the broader community of society of Kumasi, even though we have the Asante with his might and his abilities, the society was equally egalitarian, so that you had members of the community from office holders to those who held no office or position. To that extent, we understand that Asante also had different people crisscrossing. In fact, Kumasi historically was opened up to Hausa, Mande traders and different people from different regions and territories prior to the 18th century and to the 19th century. Kumasi remained an entrepot, so to speak, where different ideas radiated. As a matter of fact, the formation, the founding of Kumasi out of Kwaman, where the Asante Constitution was fully firmed up, gives us a very clear impression about the fact that the Asante and Kwame Frimpong Anoche, Okonfo Anoche, and the eminent chiefs who resided in their specific social and political jurisdiction agreed to that constitution which brought about an Asante Union. An idea that was alien to the European, because the European assumed that
the Asante Union came about only through war, and assumed that the Asante Union could be compared to that, for example, of the European kings or monarchs who might have had their territories or spheres through dint of war. As a matter of fact, this constitution, I dare say, and challenge the discussion, ran prior to the Magna Carta. In that respect, its authority was so binding in the sacred stool, the Sikibia. That spirituality is that which was also missing in the minds of the European in many respects. Asante from Kumasi was interested in diplomacy. And so before even war, there will be diplomatic engagements, there will be discussions, there will be emissaries, and this subsisted since the time of Osetutu the First, Asante Kingdom. So the critical question, therefore, is to ask, why didn't the British annex Asante after 1874? Just to jump into other discussions. What had changed on the side of the British by 1800? I know the chair is looking at me, I have more time. The 19th century began with, the reign of, Osetutu Kwame Isibe. And we understand that there were a lot of interesting dynamics in terms of diplomacy. In fact, his peaceful relations between the British is well documented. In fact, Kumasi in this period received 3 European missions, which included individuals like William Hyde Copper in 1816. Then we have Frederick James, Thomas Edward Bowditch, William Hutchinson, and Henry Tebley in 1817, and Joseph Dupuy, Francis Collins, Benjamin Salmon, and David Mills Graves in 1820.